And that's the tough part here is because we were talking earlier about like, okay, so locally, they know how you play, so maybe out of state's a better metric. But then when we talk about out of state, it's usually in the context of a tournament. And now we're beholden to how the bracket shakes out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really hard, like to
Yeah.
get real results.
I think the main way you can tell who the best is consistency. That's really the only metric I could think of that goes over multiple tournaments.
Hello, and welcome to the Absolute Guard Podcast. We're a competitive fighting game community podcast examining history and current events from the lens of the Arizona grassroots scene. Benny couldn't be with us today. He's currently flying over the Atlantic in his quest to locate Amelia Earhart, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that he's over the wrong ocean. Instead, we're joined by Thrasher and Kyoku today. How's it going, guys?
Hey, how's it going?
This is episode 76, and at this point, I'm out of agenda items. Like that's actually kind of the thing here is I had a couple like free-form questions that I originally wanted to post to Marvin and Mike, and then I was like, well, if Benny's not here, we'll have Marvin and Mike on at the same time. We'll just throw those questions at you. So if you recall, Marvin, I think the last time you were on was like, God, it had to be like last year at this point, and we've been trying to get you on for a while, if I recall correctly.
I don't remember exactly when it was, but yeah, it was late last year. Probably pre-November, actually.
Yeah. Oh, was it even before Street Fighter 6 came out? I can't remember.
Street Fighter 6 had definitely been out.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Because it was after Evo.
It was after Evo? Okay, fair enough. We've been trying to get you on for a little while, but I think just due to scheduling and whatnot, it was
mostly scheduling.
So, yeah, and as kind of just a way to lampshade it for our audience here, we're recording this on a Wednesday as opposed to our usual taping on Thursdays, so we finally made the scheduling work out. Cool. So I guess this is different than a normal biography episode. It's kind of just more of a roundtable discussion, and the last couple episodes we've been talking a lot about like game knowledge and game theory, specifically about Street Fighter 6. But I kind of wanted to open with some more higher level conversations about like the community and the sense of competition. And I thought that you two as guests would be awesome for that. I think that I have considered both of you like the best in the scene at different points in time throughout my competitive fighting game career here. And I've noticed that when you're operating at that high of a level, the mentality changes a lot as far as like how you approach these games, how you approach other people, how you approach the community, whether or not you're considered a community leader. Lots of different like aspects of that at play there. So I wanted to kind of focus this episode on like really like high level mentality and the general theme of this episode being like, what does it mean to truly be the best? And I thought the best way to start that out would be to kind of pose this question to you all is like, as people who have kind of made it to the top echelons, at least in the local scene and on the national scale, why do you play fighting games? And Marvin, could we start with you on that one?
Yeah, sure. Other than obviously the aesthetic of it, like especially for me getting into Guilty Gear because it looked like an anime type of game and I was into anime at the time. The things that really keep me into fighting games, it has a lot to do with that kind of dopamine you get from executing the things that you practice a lot or countering that situation that you work on practicing. Like that kind of stuff is what usually keeps me playing or motivates me to continue to play. Like being able to have these layered mind games that you work on and then execute it in a match or in real time. And it just feels so like you can't replicate that feeling outside of playing or outside of playing versus another person.
Do you think of it as almost like a puzzle to be solved then?
I think of it more fluidly than that because I don't actively think about the puzzles. I think of it on like a case-to-case basis, like a person-to-person basis. Like almost like a speed chess situation where your move and you're thinking about the next move, but then game to game, those moves change.
Okay.
It's
So
like a
it's
chess required timing as well. Like
Yeah.
if when you moved, the piece
Yeah.
mattered.
You could miss your chess move and then lose the game, or lose your turn.
so to dig a little bit deeper into that, like there's a timing aspect to it and there's an execution aspect to it for sure. But like, what's the difference between that and like a platformer or a Mega Man game? You know, and Marvin, you brought up specifically the person to person interaction. So like, what is that? Like, how does that give you the dopamine?
That's the biggest part, probably, because the dopamine comes from not like doing this in an organic situation that you can't recreate. Because if you're doing these motions in training mode or doing these drills in training mode, you can do them consistently, or you can do them like 5 times in a row. But as soon as you're in a game against a person and you don't control what they're doing, that's when it becomes hard to suddenly execute a thing on demand in maybe reaction to a situation. And that's what I really enjoy, is to feel those situations happen in real time and be able to do the thing that I've been trying to incorporate into my game or trying to practice. So especially when like you get a read on somebody or a situation that maybe over the course of just a 2 out of 3 game, it's not a very long time to try to predict what someone will do in a given situation. But then if you do it properly or do it correctly, or train somebody in a certain way to act a certain way over such a short amount of time, that's where that like dopamine comes from.
Okay. So like I'm hearing it almost like it's like your opponent represents like an extra level of variance in executing your game plan, right? And I'm curious about like, what is the difference between that variance in like an RNG setting where like you have a card game or something and you might happen to draw a certain way, right? Like why how is a person different in that regard to you?
So you're saying like if you were playing against like a computer in a card game type of situation?
Yeah, or like any kind of random element. Like what about it makes a person makes a person to person interaction special
I
compared
think
to
the person interaction that makes it special is that I know the person can think. Like a robot, even if the robot was random, the robot's not thinking. And if the robot isn't random and it's designed to just always do the best thing, that's also not random. A person can feel random, and it could also feel like it's doing the right thing every time. But in reality, the person is thinking and they're coming up with their own ideas like against your ideas. So I feel like I really enjoy that kind of interaction, that you can try to manipulate how a person is thinking because you know they can think, or you hope they can think.
Okay. I have a couple other clarifying questions about that, but I'm also curious about from Mike, from your perspective, like it'll probably tie into it a little bit too. Like what keeps you playing these games?
For me, what keeps me playing is competition. I tend to thrive on that. You know, the whole like, whether it's like a warrior type mentality or not, where it's like I want to be better than you and whoever else. Like if we're gonna do a thing, I want to be the best at it. That's just kind of how I've always been. I'm not necessarily always the best, but I'm always trying to get there. That's usually my goal. Winning, stopping people from the cat is on the screen.
Yeah, my cat has made her appearance. I'll tell you a story about that in a bit, but
yeah,
winning, right?
But just like, yeah, you know, when two people are playing a fighting game, it's like you're measuring multiple things. You're measuring who knows the most, who has trained the hardest, who has the most talent, who has the most drive to get better, who really wants to win on that day, because it's like a mental strength thing sometimes. Sometimes you can be getting hit with some stuff and it could seem like the person that you're playing is psychic. And it's like, how do you overcome that feeling of, oh no, I'm going to lose, and still pull out the match. Those are the feelings that I like. Winning on a big scale is a huge reason, like winning a big tournament that has a lot on the line. There's a dopamine hit that comes from that, where you're standing there at the end, you're the guy, and like you just kind of get to soak in that for however long that moment is. Then you chase that again the next time. But staying on top is not easy, because the moment you're the guy, everybody is coming for that. The same people who have that same drive you do. And our scene is lucky to have quite a few people who have that drive. But it's always like a friendly thing, like usually the people I'm closest with, you guys, Chase and Flappy and John and Nick, those are the guys who are also at the top because we share that same mentality. We're not there. We might be having fun, but that's not why we're there.
That's actually a good point, right? Is that frequently when I ask the question of like, why do you play fighting games? The shallowest answer I get is because they're fun, right? And not to shit on that answer per se, because obviously you have to have fun, but the real question is like, why is it fun? Why is it fun to beat other people as far as like on a competitive scale in the competition, right? You mentioned being the guy, right? Is that like the feeling of being the best in the room that day? Or is it the feeling of the best in a certain region in that day? Like, what does it mean to be the guy?
I mean, there's levels, right? Just like in anything else, if there's, in college basketball, there's the best guy. It may be tough to figure out who that is, but then there's the best guy in the NBA,
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the best person of all time, who's Michael Jordan, clearly. Shut up, LeBron fans. But, but yeah, like, so there's levels, the first step is being the best person in your play group or in your town. And then there's the best person in the state. Then there's the best person on your side of the country, east, west. Luckily with 6, that's kind of really blended now, that once you break out of your scene, the sky's kind of the limit, Yeah. But like, there's levels to it. And you kind of got to figure out for yourself exactly how far you want to go, because you might be able to be the best in your scene, but you may never do anything on the outside. And sometimes people are the best in their scene because they've played everybody in their scene, not necessarily because they're better than everyone. And but when you show up and you win, it's hard to argue that. The results mean a lot. But then Evo is that test for us in our scene, because that's the tournament that most of our scene goes to, or the most of our scene. We get the most attendance there from Arizona, and then sometimes the person who's winning everything doesn't go as far as the person who, maybe is getting second or third, but they have a different mindset with how they approach the game. And my goal personally is to just continue to be the best, and be, not that I'm the best right now, because I'm certainly not, but like, that is my goal to get back to, and hopefully take that next step and become something outside of the scene.
I was very fortunate when I was like titling this episode for our overlay here. It says competition and mastery, and I got lucky in that both of your guys' answers adhere to each of those concepts. Marvin, I would peg your answer as mastery, and Thrasher or Mike, I would peg your answer as competition. So I kind of want to pose those same motivating questions to either you and flip it on its head. So like Marvin, again, I hear mastery. I hear the ability to like understand the game well enough to be able to execute on it in a way at a high level, right? And against an opponent that is thinking and being able to condition them and whatnot. can you describe to me like how that changes depending on the stage that you're playing on, whether that's locally with a group of friends, whether that's a local tournament, or all the way up at a major level where I've seen you compete at the highest levels for multiple games?
So there's definitely different ways to look at it. I feel like at a local level, that type of thinking doesn't work as well because you get to play with the same people all the time. So it's really hard to feel like you fully understand one player if they're also good and able to adapt in the same way that you are. Then it's really hard to make a strategy that feels like it's concrete. It'll always work against that player. But when you start to go more in the direction of playing people out of state or just strangers in general, then you can start to come up with those strategies that have a higher chance of working because you know what works or how to identify weaknesses or identify patterns for strangers or mixing up your own stuff in a way that might make it harder for them to figure you out because we're talking about a pretty small amount of time, just a 2 out of 3 set. And you might have never played this person before. Even if
Right.
they're playing a character that you've seen and your Johnny Donuts at locals plays that character and you play them all the time and you feel like, oh, I know the matchup so well. You go out of state, you play against somebody else, and then that person could just start playing in a way that is completely off the rhythm that you're used to. And you could lose, especially if you overthink thinking that you know the match perfectly because of that. So I think at that stage, you have to approach things differently, trying to come up with those plans and not getting stuck in thinking that you might know everything already.
I almost like it. It feels like verbally you're painting this picture of somebody that is, well, essentially like it's like you're sculpting something, right? And it's like I need to be able to make sure that it can that my sculpture can withstand multiple environments, right? And I can sculpt it to constantly be able to be outdoors in the rain or something like that. But what happens when I take it into like an extreme heat situation? Can my game plan or can my execution withstand that? And that extra level of variance, I think that we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Mike, that alludes a lot to how what you mentioned earlier about being able to, succeed out of state or succeed in state and understand like how other people play and be able to beat those other people, but then getting mauled out of state, right? Where the sculpture that I was talking about earlier is tailored specifically for the local scene and not for the general scene, right?
Yeah. I think they go hand in hand, really, and it's tough because you kind of need everybody to be on the same page. Because as much as like you definitely don't want to blame people for why you're having trouble succeeding elsewhere. That's only a dickhead would do that, you know. But you definitely need people. Like for instance, I feel you and I, when we play the Jury Chun matchup, we were playing the matchup. And when we watched Uma and Lashar play at Capcom Cup, it looked, obviously they have higher execution ceilings and they are better players than we are for sure. But we are hitting the same bullet points of the matchup that they are hitting, whether it be jump shenanigans and mixing with Chun's anti-airs or using Chun's good buttons to go over Jury's fireball. They were doing all those things. So I feel like when I play other Chuns, I don't get caught off guard. And that's because you and I, as much as we know what the other person is going to do sometimes, you don't always use that to win, especially not in casuals. In a tournament, whatever. Do whatever you got to do in a tournament to win. But when you have somebody else who's committing to playing matchups with you in casuals, not just focused on winning, because there's been times where both of us have gotten massive win streaks on each other, and we could adapt and start doing I know exactly what he wants to do on wake up or whatever.
Mhm.
But when you explore more bullet points in the matchup, the less you are going to get caught off guard when you play somebody out of state.
It's kind of like the difference between practicing to it's playing to win versus playing to get better, I think. And a lot of times those things align, but um I think of it almost in terms of like how do you want to win? Do you want to win by psychologically dominating your opponent, or do you want to win by like knowing more about the game? And like I think that that actually came up recently in a conversation I had with Mr. SNK. Shout out to Nico if you're listening here. Where you know he told me that I apply more of a scientific approach and he applies more of a psychological approach. And the beauty of fighting games and the beauty of pretty much anything here is that the answer is never one or the other. The answer is both, right? You got to have both. And because again, if you play too scientifically, you're predictable and you're a robot, and then they kill you for it, and you miss out on the adaptation stuff that Marvin mentioned, right? But if you play too much by reads, it's volatile. I think you're taking big ass chances, and then it might not pay off, and statistically, that's how you get eliminated in pools. Okay.
Yeah, I think you have to be honest with yourself. Like, why am I winning? Like if I get in on, if you and I are playing and I get in one time around and that has worked out for the last 3 games and I've just guessed right on your wake up, okay, those are wins. But that's not the same as if we go back to neutral 4 or 5 times around. Then we've really learned something other than somebody's wake up tendencies,
Yeah.
So just be aware, I guess, how you're winning. Like wins are fun and they do give you that dopamine hit regardless of casuals or tournament. But especially in casuals, you want to be learning. Like you need to be working on something. You don't want to just get wins because you have godlike offense or whatever, and I've definitely felt myself winning for that reason sometimes. And I've literally in matches, sometimes I will back up and just give space. It's like, okay, what are you going to do now? Can I beat you this way? I know I can beat you offensively, but can I beat you in neutral? Can I beat you by playing super patient? Some people, I will literally just try and time them out to see if I can stop them from doing what they want to do. And I think that is a good way of preventing yourself from falling into one way of playing or relying on exploiting somebody's habits, because the next player may not have those same habits.
Particularly in a patch world that we have too, or an online world where a balanced patch could come and take away that one thing that you're relying on, in an instant, and then suddenly your character's broken, or sorry, not broken, but your character is in a wheelchair. Like suddenly you can't anti-air with Crouch Fierce anymore, you can't OD Amnesia.
Yeah.
But as evidenced by recent tournament results, there are other players that can overcome those boundaries because their game plan is solid enough. Like Velociraptor. Shout outs to John. I heard he's a big fan of the JP nerfs, by the way. Like on the Event Hubs podcast, he was saying how deserved they were and how people were right to complain about those issues, right?
Yeah, I think you're mixing up which John you're talking about.
Fair enough. But I do really like, I value your guys' opinion here, because in so many ways you opened with mastery and competition, but then at the same time you guys are able to blend them together. And Marvin, like if you recall, like on our previous conversation, last year, we talked a little bit about that cycle of like when to adapt to somebody versus when to not adapt to someone. And I think that this like particularly at playing out of state or at the major level, right, that has a very poignant rather not it is something that applies very much to playing out of state, because at a certain point you just have to execute your game plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we're talking about adaptive versus reactive, essentially.
Yeah. And that what you just said, it made me think of something that Abe used to tell me. Like
winning is fun?
No. something a little more useful than that. But It was actually something that he would sometimes when we were playing in the crowd. Like if I was playing and Abe was in the crowd, he might say stuff like almost like shout coaching.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? Like if you hear stuff coming from the crowd, like I've heard Abe say in the past, this is way back, like Street Fighter 4 days, like not to take risks in a situation where you're winning. Especially in a game like Street Fighter 4 where a lot of characters could play very slowly and just wait to punish the opponent. There were situations where I might have a life lead and I'm sitting there and he would like yell out something like, "Oh, don't take any risks, or don't throw it away, or like let them hang themselves." Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important at that high level to think of your risk reward in situations against a stranger specifically where you might not know what they're capable of. Because let's say you're playing against somebody and you're up like 80% to their 20%, and you were just all over them that round and you got set back to neutral for whatever reason. Now you could think, well, I'm up so much, I could take a risk. I could do something to try to close it out. And then they could suddenly turn the tables, and now they're asserting their offense that they didn't get to do, which might actually be quite good. So
they have momentum as well, right?
Yeah. So you could suddenly lose because you were too comfortable and you took a risk. Okay. Which sometimes those risks can pay off, but I think thinking about the risk reward is really important when you're playing against someone that you don't know and you need to still gather information, or if you haven't gathered that information yet.
So there's value in doing the predictable thing, essentially, and forcing them to make a hard read in order to counter that predictable thing.
Yeah. Like as long as you feel like you're comfortable, like doing that. Some people's playstyle might not be as comfortable to do that. Like if I were in that situation where I need to wait and whiff punish them, maybe someone else might not think I need to just wait and whiff punish because maybe they're not as good at whiff punishing. Maybe they want to try to force the situation. But in my case, in that situation, I would think I should try to play reactive instead of proactive and make them show me what they can do, or make them do something that I can win without taking too much chances.
Okay. It's I think I was talking with somebody about the differences between the different Street Fighter games, and Street Fighter 4 was a good example where well, let me take a step back. In Street Fighter 6, I actually want to run this by you guys. In Street Fighter 6, if you are you have a huge life lead, and then you attack somebody, and then they uppercut you, what are your thoughts? Like, what do you feel like when you're really far up there and you eat the uppercut?
Like if their life is low already?
Yeah, if their life is low and you have an enormous lead and you have that rope to give, right? Like what does an uppercut tell you?
So, in my opinion, in that situation, there's other variables, but I would feel like if I was up already and even if that was like a situation where the uppercut, if I blocked it, that was the end of the round. I would think, well, I've already been winning up until this point, so I just needed to continue to do that, regardless of, I guess, wrong on their wake up. Even though it could have cost them the game, I have to go back to the positive of like, I've already beat them in other ways, so I just need to continue to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Like, it does. So you wouldn't deviate from your game plan, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't second guess yourself.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike, are you thinking the same thing then? Like, any positive or negative for eating that DP?
So there's, like Marvin said, there's a ton of variables. The biggest one in 6 being drive meter. So if they will burn out with that DP, I am so willing to eat that uppercut, to eat that reversal. And so that's really the biggest one for me. If I've got a huge life lead and it's going to burn them out, I will not stop. I mean, unless it's super obvious. Like, I will never say never, but like I'm way more likely to just keep pressuring you if you're low on drive bar. You know, if I, let's say I just stunned you and didn't kill, maybe I don't want to eat it as much because now you have a full drive bar to bring back the whole round. But I'd say drive bar is the main variable I would consider in that situation. Otherwise, yeah, life lead. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
I like how you put it in terms of resources too, because Street Fighter V also had the same thing where like Street Fighter V was the first Street Fighter game where invincible reversals cost something, and they put you in a crush counter state. In the same way that they in 6 they cost 2 drive bars and they put you in a punish counter state. And I was comparing and contrasting with another friend about the difference between that and 4, Street Fighter 4, where you might eat DP FADC Ultra. And I think that ties a little bit back into what Marvin was saying about risk and reward, where getting hit by an Ultra in 4, I felt like that could swing the match and create that momentum situation, and now they can start their offense that you might not have seen before. So that would change your. I guess Marvin, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like if you were playing Street Fighter 4 and somebody DP'd you, would that change your game plan at all?
It's harder to think about a game I haven't played in a while,
Okay.
but
Fair.
like thinking about characters that could do DPFA DC Ultra on you.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, the damage was lowered a lot after a while, but I think if the DP had a higher risk behind it, then you have to be more careful, because if the DP, like Street Fighter 6, for example, DP 20%, 15%, whatever, it's basically like a JP DP for Street Fighter 4, where if someone can do DP into Ultra, they're getting like 40, 50% combo on you. So it's just a higher risk reward that you need to be more careful of. So maybe you'll be more inclined to block in that situation.
I love that you brought up JP as an example of that. Shout out
That
to
is, I think that's a good example. Or
Yeah.
pre-nerf JP, where he could
Right.
get. I mean, currently now, it's much less damage, but if he's comboing into level 3, he has the minimum scaling, so he could still do a good amount of damage. Like that could close the round, or put you in burnout into a checkmate situation off of his reversal that he can still do.
Yeah.
Right. So like I don't know about you guys, but when I knocked JP down pre-patch, I haven't really played him very much against him post-patch, but pre-patch, like my entire like wheel of options would be impacted by that. I'd be like, I can't go for a throw because I might lose half my life for this and get put in the corner and burn out, right? And I fully agree with you as far as like the risk reward basically informing that. And then that in turn causes that hesitation, and that's when he jumps forward out of the corner on his way. Right?
Yeah, another variable is like how your character matches up with that character in neutral. Because like, you know, Dhalsim may have level 3, but also if you back off Dhalsim, you might not get in again. So like you're more likely to just stay in and risk it than you are back off and then, oh, maybe he teleported out of the corner and now I have to, unless I'm going to literally sit there for however much time is left and make him open me up, you're going to have to get in again to close the round out.
And you could say something similar for like Guile too. Guile having that flash kick and having the option to do that all the time. So whenever you get it on Guile, it was probably difficult. And then you have to also think he also has a DP. So on any of those wake ups, is he going to DP and then he's out? Or do you think because he has a DP and because he wants to keep you out that you block? I don't know. There's too many variables to that.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right. I kind of threw it in a vacuum for you guys.
It goes back to that, trust your judgment. Like, be okay. It's being somebody who's lost in tournament many times. It always felt better to lose playing my game than it did to lose for second guessing and not doing something that maybe was working, or, not adapting to something because I was afraid of what the other option could be. When you're in a tournament situation, sometimes you just got to go with your gut and be willing to hold the result, and hope that the time that you've put in prior to the tournament is going to carry you through that. Because it feels way worse when you're like, I don't know if I want to pressure. You're wrong.
In a lot of ways, it feels better to lose to your opponent than it does to yourself, right?
Yeah.
So again, I wanted to bring it back and I brought up competition and mastery as kind of like the succinct ways of describing your guys' answers. But there's a third answer that I was thinking of when thinking of this question that I wanted to make sure that was represented on this podcast was the social side of it, or the community side of it, where why do people play fighting games? And a lot of times I think it's because we have there's a community around it, and that could range from like we talk about in terms of the Arizona local scene and the scene that goes out and plays at the police station in Tucson, right? But like it could also be like an online group of friends. I feel like me and Benny have talked with so many different people about their fighting game origins, and it pretty much always starts with, I wanted to be the best amongst my friends or brother or sister, and like whatever small group there was at the beginning, and then that community just gradually grows and grows of people that I want to be better than, essentially. And so I think that and that's also like the social side of it, of like being friends and being able to like, have dinner at Cane's Chicken or Denny's after big casual sessions and just talk about the game, and being able to meet people from all different walks of life. Like I've done all of those things many times with you guys. Actually, I think I've been to Denny's with the bike many times. I've been to Cane's with Marvin a couple of times too, and Cane's with Mike as well. Man, we gotta be at better restaurants though. Jesus Christ. I don't know what other areas are open that late, but either way,
that's usually the key. Is like we get out of there at like 10:30, and it's nothing else is open.
Yep.
Except for pasties.
Oh yeah. There are a couple times you've driven all the way up to Phoenix, and everyone's like, "We want Cane's Chicken Fingers," which is just right next to the police station in Tucson, compared to Cornish Pasty Company, right, which is a Phoenix staple. They don't have one in Tucson yet.
No, not that I know of, unless they snuck one down here, but I don't think so.
I would be surprised if that didn't happen in the upcoming future, because they've got like 4 or 5 different locations down in Phoenix. But yeah, like I definitely, just to get a little personal here, like I started playing these games when I was 22, I think, or 20, if I recall correctly. And I grew up pretty sheltered as far as like social sides of like social skills and whatnot. I grew up in the white suburbs, essentially, and so I didn't really get a lot of like perspectives on the world. I had a very like dogmatic view of like, I'm also an engineer. I grew up with like a family of engineers and math based people, and so like the concept of art really didn't even occur to me. And so I got to meet so many different artists as part of the fighting game community, which has a huge contingent, for lack of a better phrase, of artists and expression and creativity. And that actually kind of ties back into kind of what Marvin was saying earlier. And that one thing that was popping into my head over and over again is that, like, I was talking about a sculpture, but it's also like playing music in like a performative sense, right? Where like that thing that game plan that we were talking about executing, it's almost like you're playing a song, and then like you're testing that song on different crowds of people and being like, what sounds good here, what sounds what may not have landed very well, what song, which of my library of songs may not have landed very well, maybe I'll take that out of my set, and then on top of that, you have the ability to play in a band, and you have another player, and you're trying to riff off of them essentially, and then making beautiful music that way, I guess. I don't know. I've seen fighting games and music compared quite a bit. So like I did want to just make sure that perspective was represented, and that we're not just like complete tryhards in the community. I think there's a friendship side of it. There's a social side of it, but I found that particularly like when we start climbing the ladders out of state, that the friendship stuff ends up taking a backseat for like cutthroat competition. I don't know about you guys, but like once I started competing out of state, particularly playing with like a lot of the Cali people or the Pacific Northwest people, like there was like a little bit of regional rivalry, but there was a lot of like we don't want you to win and we hate your fucking guts. And I was curious if you guys have run into anything quite like that on the social level. Marvin, do you want to start? You look pensive.
I was trying to think about it. I was like, I don't know, because I'm just I try to be friendly with everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, all the times that kind of stuff comes up, like it's always like other people around me, like Abe or Isaac, trying to like goad other people into being angry while I'm playing though. But yeah, I always feel like I'm still trying to be nice when even when I'm at that level where I'm trying to go out there. Because at the end of the day, even though it's a competition, it's still, to me, it's still friendly, especially if you have a friendship or if you're on good terms with those people out of state. To me, you still end up being friendly. Like in the game, you're not friendly, but afterwards, everything is fine. Like that's the way that I see it.
I guess I'm kind of trying to hit on like a sense of tribalism that would come with that sense of community that I'm talking about. And are you saying that like you just try to keep that tribalism from occurring essentially?
You mean like, so you're talking about like if we were Arizona versus like California type of thing.
Or Phoenix versus Tucson or West Side versus East Side, you know?
I mean, that stuff definitely happens, yeah. Like Tucson versus Phoenix will definitely have those little rivalries, but and even sometimes afterwards there might be saltiness, even after the tournament's over, after the exhibition is over. But me personally, I try not to get too caught up in it because I don't know, it's not that important to me. Like that aspect of it, like the rivalry of trying to like, I don't know, drama is not the right word because it's kind of friendly drama. But I'm not usually into that aspect of it. Even if we have like a thing, if I'm in the mode of like I'm trying to get better, I'm almost looking beyond that of like I want to get better than this even. I want to get better to the point that I will surpass even what we're doing now.
Sure. As a brief commentary on Phoenix versus Tucson, I love how you said beyond it, because when Street Fighter V was on its way out, in the midst of the pandemic as well, the scene wasn't big enough to sustain both the Phoenix and the Tucson separate scenes and to sustain that rivalry. And so that's actually how I got started getting to know Mike a lot better. And one of the phrases that I kept using over and over again is that we have bigger fish to fry. We don't have the luxury of being able to have this Phoenix versus Tucson rivalry, but we can compete in Wednesday night fights online and represent Arizona together. And I think that created like, we still have a rivalry. Like I still want to beat his ass when we play, but like I think that like that. Let me throw a bomb out here. I think that the Phoenix versus Tucson rivalry was actually pretty harmful during the Street Fighter V era in particular, because I think it limited our ability to practice with each other because people didn't want to practice, like they didn't want to lose to each other, so they didn't want to practice with each other.
So it's like you're hiding your tech and hiding your strategies.
Yeah.
And that was kind of around Street Fighter 4 too, but Street Fighter 4 was much harder because there was not really online. So we didn't really have the ability to play with Phoenix people unless we went over there, vice versa.
Yeah, at the end of Street Fighter V, it was like John said, there's no keeping that rivalry alive when my main training partner is Phoenix. You know, then it got to the point where even when John would play Tucson people, you know, why am I going to root against my training partner to fight somebody who never comes out to anything or like hardly play? You know, like it didn't make much sense to me, and it felt less like I was like Tucson, and it was more of an Arizona thing. probably mainly because of the Wednesday night fight stuff. Because both Phoenix and Arizona, or Phoenix and Tucson, were both cheering you on when you're in the top 8 of a Wednesday night fights. Nobody gave a shit then.
Sure.
So for me, that was kind of what ended it. It's like, and a lot of the people who pushed that narrative are people who abandoned the scene during the end of Street Fighter V. So it's like, that's why even now, outside of minor, I never started, but when Phoenix starts popping off and saying stuff about Phoenix, then I'll say something about Tucson. but like, that lasts for 5 minutes. Then it's a matter of, this is Arizona, so it's just like, you're not going to then abandon the scene in 5 because I didn't like the game, or whatever excuse you want to use to hide the fact that it's not 4 and you're not good anymore. Then that's fine. But you're not going to come back in 6 and try and restart this rivalry against my main training partner, who's Phoenix. You're not going to get me. If you guys want to do that on the side, that's fine. More power to you. But like, when you want to start putting together heated exhibitions and Tucson versus Phoenix things, I don't really care to participate in it, to be honest with you.
I do agree that it kind of it sets us back more than it helps us, because it's nice to have those type of competitions, but if it gets people not playing with each other at the capacity that we could, especially given the good online infrastructure that we have now, that like, if we were like the older games and we wanted to only win against Phoenix, we wouldn't play each other. Like, people wouldn't get in these online like Discord calls and create a friendly group to play with each other online. That stuff wouldn't happen. You would have a secret Tucson Discord where we only get together in Tucson to play, and then the secret Phoenix Discord where they only get together and play.
Yeah.
So, but I feel like that kind of stuff also went by the wayside a bit more as we travel together. Like, when we do these big travel things to Evo, or like going to SoCal regionals in the past, we would come together as Arizona, and it would feel like we are not against each other, like we shouldn't be. We're against everybody else. Like that feels better, and it's more constructive.
Yeah. I also think the netcode is a big part of that as well.
For sure.
It's like, it's much easier to play Phoenix guys now than it was in 4, like, you can hop on the Discord and play. So
online is like the big elephant in the room for pretty much everything that we've talked about so far on this pod here. In regards to, like, we talk about like traveling into majors and not playing someone we've never played before, right? And now we're at the point technologically where I could sign into Street Fighter 6 right now and play against somebody I'd never played before. And so I was curious about, like, just to bring it back to, well, actually, before I go there, I want to make sure that the tribalism perspective is also accurately represented on this show, particularly for the folks that did push that narrative. Because Marvin, you mentioned, like, while those events could be fun, or that there were good sides of those events, and I want to make sure that that's captured as well. Like, we had bar fights events, we had bar fights are the main ones, honestly, or where we had those team battles, right? Team Steve versus Team Abe, Team Phoenix versus Team Tucson. And I thought that those were really solid as far as, like, getting everybody riled up and getting everybody, like, invested in the game and invested in the outcome and getting people to practice hard. So while I did open with it being, I thought it was a net negative, I do think that there are people in our community, in the same way that we were motivated by competition and motivated by mastery, we're motivated by beating, like, by anger or by rivalries or by not wanting to lose to that one motherfucker, right? And that, I think that feeling comes from, being in our 20s and playing, like, being macho and trying to, prove to the world that we're better than this one dude, right? I've interviewed enough OGs to know that, like, that is an extreme motivator, like, when lacking an online visible scene. So I did want to highlight that, like, even as a former organizer, I've thrown a couple bar fights myself. You know, other people have organized bar fights before, and those are some of the most hype moments in our community. Um, and
I agree with that. Yeah, like um, definitely the bar fight stuff when you can create a story and, like you said, build up hype because you know this event is coming. You know these two particular players are going to play. They're both practicing. They both know who they play. So the matchups, like you already know that a lot of that stuff. So I think that stuff is pretty hype. And the ones that I've taken part in they all felt great. I never felt like there was any additional animosity after the set was over. Like I remember in particular, we did one for Cross Tekken, and I don't even really remember the outcome. I just remember as soon as we were done playing, we went into the other room and continued to play. And it's just like back to playing more. Like that's the whole thing is that we're all trying to get better. We're all trying to have fun with it as well. And we just want to play.
Sure, I agree. I remember that was the one at the Armadillo Grill, if I recall correctly. That was the Cross Tekken exhibition. And then we also had Las Vegas come by to play Team Arizona for Marvel versus Team Las Vegas for Marvel, and that was like a lot of the hitbox guys. So even that had also like tribalism ramifications there, out of state rivalries, which is I think where we currently live. But going back to the online being kind of the elephant in the room here, where like the local scene, for at least for Phoenix and Tucson, we've kind of done a pretty good job at like saying like this is our Arizona scene, right? And some of that's due to like drawbacks of online as a whole, of the American online infrastructure, where we can't reasonably have a strong training partner in Florida or something. Or maybe we could, but like just we're not inclined to do that. So I was curious if like, do you guys see a future where, the technology is good enough where like maybe like 2XKO comes out and they're doing that, client server matchmaking thing and taking advantage of Riot servers, and suddenly everybody can play everybody from around the world. And this is a question I posed a couple times on the show, but do you think that the local scene dissipates after a while?
I don't know.
I was just gonna say I agree with that. I don't really think so at all.
Yeah, I think the local scene, there are friends that even when they weren't playing the game, I still talk to them. Even there's ones now that just show up and dabble here and there, but I still enjoy them. And even some where I don't even necessarily agree with the way they play the game, but I would never not play them because they're just good people, So I don't see it impacting that at all, because one thing that is fun to do as somebody, because I've been the guy on the other end of this, but it's also fun now to show off your new guys, like I was that guy. Nick, shout outs to Nick. He did that for me. We went to California and he was the guy cheering for me when I'm on the stage. He was the guy going, "Hey, check this guy out." And so it's fun to do that when I'm like, "Hey, you guys don't know, but Flappy's going to destroy you guys in a little bit." And then here he is, one of the strongest players in the scene. If you learned how to ride his damn bike and didn't break his hand. But yeah, like, so it is fun to discover those new guys and be like, "Hey, this is going to be good." Or at Evo, to see your new guy beating and like just destroying somebody. It's like, yeah, that is the next Arizona guy right there, So that is some part of it that I think keeps the scene going as well. It's like, it's always fun as long as you can set your ego aside when they're beating you and just enjoy the fact that they are getting better. That is one more part of it that keeps the community together, in my opinion.
It's a little vindicating too, because you're like, oh man, these guys are getting hit by that same shit too. It's not just me. Right?
Yeah. Like for example, at the last tournament, right? Like John and I Velociraptor John and I have been training partners for a long time now, and he's beaten me multiple times. I've beaten him multiple times in this game. There was no Phoenix versus Tucson at the end of that tournament. At the end of that tournament, I wanted Chase to win. He just beat me. He's the new guy on top. I don't want yet another victory, even though John
photoshopped John face sipping out of that margarita.
It was more just I wanted to see the nerfs mean something. I wanted to see Chase overcome that demon, and like, okay, you can beat me, but can you win the whole thing? And it looked like he was going to do that. Unfortunately, he didn't. But see, that's an example of the Phoenix versus Tucson thing didn't exist to me then. And it wasn't even anything against John. We didn't even play that tournament. It's not like I was salty he beat me. I just was like, I want to see this new person get to that spot and like get that legitimate, like, all the best people were there. I beat the best guy at the time in the moment to win that tournament. And that's what I was rooting for. But I was at John's wedding. Like, he's one of my best friends in this scene. So like, of course I still am happy he won, but in the moment, that's not who I was going for. But if I was sitting there with this brain dead Phoenix versus Tucson mentality, I wouldn't even have enjoyed the run that Chase was making.
I get you. I have a long conversation planned, I think, regarding what it means to be the best. But before we do that, I had one last question to you all. In that, I opened this show talking about like, why do you play fighting games, and we heard that, right? But I think you guys actually extrapolated on what I was trying to say, which is, why do you keep playing these fighting games? And that got me thinking, when you lose at fighting games, what keeps you from quitting altogether? Like, how do you cope with that? How do you get back on the saddle after getting knocked down and continue perfecting your game plan, or continue to put yourself out there to compete? Marvin, you want to go first there?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely like a personality thing. Everyone is going to handle that differently, because some people might take the losses more critically, or some people might take the losses as a motivator. Like, there's definitely the side of getting down on yourself because you lost and then thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. But then there's the other side, which is the way I generally feel when I lose. I'm thinking, I need to improve. Like, I want to get better so that doesn't happen again. Like, it's more of a motivator for me to lose than to win. Even losing is more motivating than winning to me.
Do you ever find yourself playing to not lose or anything like that?
Not. I don't really think of it that way. I don't really think of the outcome in the middle of playing. But if I lose, I usually will reflect on that and think, oh, I lost because X, Y, or Z. I need to work on X, Y, and Z. So it's usually like a homework type of thing. It gives me something to think about, because generally when I lose, I'm thinking it's because of a mistake I made, or a situation that I didn't handle the correct way, or all sorts of different reasons. But for me, it's generally a motivator to lose. And then that's going to help me try to improve more, or give me ideas on what I need to improve on.
But like, to be straight here, like, it does sting, right?
Oh yeah. Lose. Like, losing, it never feels good to lose. Like, I don't think there's a situation where losing is like a good thing, unless you entered the tournament and you didn't want to be there. And, yeah. And you're like, I need to get out of here. Get me out of this tournament.
I need to make my other, like, you're at your, like, a Street Fighter on the side when you're actually a pro Mortal Kombat player or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I need to make my pool.
Yeah, that kind of situation, maybe you care. It doesn't hurt to lose, but losing always hurts. Even like my recent example is this last Street Fighter 6 tournament that I went to. I wasn't at the last one, but the one before that, at the police station. I lost the chase in a match that felt like it was a good match. but I knew I wasn't at my peak. Like I felt like I haven't been playing that much. I kind of just came here to hang out and have fun. But then as you start playing, you start getting competitive.
Yeah.
And like going through the tournament and getting higher and higher, and then getting to the situation where Chase is good. Like this is the match that I could lose now. And I did. And even though I went there to have fun and did not care about the results and did not think I would do well, losing that match doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
Because suddenly you thought, well, if I cared more, if I practiced more, the result could have been different. And we'll never know.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about earlier about losing to yourself versus losing to your opponent, right? Where you're like, if only I had practiced more, and then you kind of put it on yourself, right?
Yeah, because then I could feel like I lost 100% to Chase. Not I lost to not knowing if I practiced enough, or knowing that or feeling like I could have done better.
Yeah, I've had that recently as well. I've been playing other games, defending democracy and other habits.
Helldivers.
And then when I lose doing that, it sucks because you feel like you're slacking, like you've been lazy. May not even be the case. You could have just been busy. But in my case, I know I've been lazy as far as getting Street Fighter 6 going. But the tournament before this last one, that one was one where I did lose. But while I was salty, I still was salty I lost. I knew that I had nothing that was like on the table. It was like, I made it to grand finals. I lost to Jon. He won when I was at my best. And like, of course you could always practice more, right? But like, I felt like I had put in the work to win, and then I lost. And it was like, all right, you can hold your head higher then, because it's like, he was just better that day, whatever it may be. But like this last one, I lost, and I feel like I could make a million excuses about that, but it's like, that one feels worse, oddly enough. The one with the excuses feels worse, because it feels like I was lazy and I've been putting time into other things versus staying in the position that I want to be in more than I want to play those other games.
Okay. So put the shoe on the other foot for a second, and you beat somebody, and then they give you a list of excuses. Like, how do you usually react to that?
For me, I'm just kind of like, I just let it go in one ear and out the other, unless it's a very consistent thing. Then it becomes more personal than that. But if it's like somebody at a tournament, like at Evo, if I beat someone and they're like, I don't know how to fight jury, or I don't know how to do this, and I'm just like, I just try and like, yeah, that sucks, man. Like, but if it's somebody who I know personally and they're doing that consistently, then I'll talk shit. And I've done this. I'm not going to name any names, but I've had where I thoroughly beat somebody, and then there was one interaction at the very end that was a little wonky. And then they immediately stood up and were like, "You got so lucky." And I said, "No, I'm just better than you." And that's not something I'm going to do to a random person at a one-off tournament. But if I play you and every time I win, you seem to always have an excuse, then it's like, all right.
That's an excellent way to go into this, though, because when you say you're better than somebody, right? And that is a general question that's been I've been thinking about that quite a bit over these past couple of months, of like, what does it mean to truly be the best in whatever sphere you decide? And like, let's just to make it somewhat concrete, so that way we don't lose everybody here. Say locally. We talked a little bit earlier about winning by playing the player versus winning by playing like your game plan that would probably succeed out of state, but it may not succeed very well locally, or what is it? What did you say, Joey Local or something?
Johnny Donuts.
Johnny Donuts, Johnny
Yeah.
Donuts. Um, and so what? And then like we've spent like 3 episodes at this point talking about the Capcom Pro Tour and all the different opinions around how the thing was seated and how the format was, and uh, you know the LCQ, and whether it was truly equitable when all the Japanese players got 2 qualifying spots and all the South America players got 2 qualifying spots. Like, and that really got me thinking, like in the long run, like what does it mean to truly be the best? And I remember when I opened up Street Fighter 6 and like that opening cinematic, they're like, "What is strength?" And it's like hella anime, right? Um, but I was curious about, because the short answer, like the spoiler alert here, is that I'm sure there's no definitive answer, and that's part of the reason why we keep playing these games. But from your guys' perspective, I'm curious about your own individual answers. Is what does it truly mean to be the best? And we can start by just saying locally. Like, what is it like? What is your metric for being the best locally?
I mean, to me, obviously, if we want to quantify it, it would need to be results. So if there was a player who consistently won all the tournaments, then that person would be the best. If there's 2 players who are consistently always top 2, then is one of them the best and one of them isn't, or are they both the best? It's kind of hard to really quantify it if there's not just one person who wins everything, which doesn't usually happen. It's pretty hard to have the situation where one person always wins. And you don't really you don't even watch grand finals. You watch up to right before grand finals to see if that person will still be in grand finals, then you don't watch it. Like that.
So you're talking about like when they're miles and miles ahead compared to it, like being like, I would tune into last week's tournament and be like, that was competitive at the very least, even though John won it and he's won the last couple, right? Okay.
But I think if you have 2 people that are close or 3 people that are close, it's hard to quantify who's the best locally, because if it's always different or it's not consistent, even if, I don't know, you could say, like, let's say one person always won and it was always competitive, it was always close, but that one other person always came up on top.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you still call that person the best, or would you say that the other person is equally as good? But the local level is kind of hard to think about because you all get to play each other so often. I think thinking beyond the local level is where you can think more about who's quote unquote the best.
As in like how people do out of state is a better litmus on who's better overall.
In my opinion, yes, because you're not playing against the same people all the time. If it's just 3 people who are always the top 3, then those people are the best locally. But let's say all 3 of those people go somewhere and they all enter the same tournaments, or the same, like they all enter multiple tournaments. I guess it's easier if they all enter the same tournament. But one of them gets much farther than the rest. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
you can try to measure it better if those people all were going to multiple events or entering like online tournaments or something that is outside of just your circle of people you always play with.
Yeah, and like this has been a very Street Fighter centered episode for obvious reasons, but like one thing that popped into my mind while you were describing this is like your rivalry in the Dragon Ball Fighters era with Ryan Karlovsky and Nice Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious about, like, of the 3 of you, and frankly, anytime there's a new anime game that comes out, like it's going to be a Ryan and Marvin fight, and sometimes Rock, right?
Sometimes there's other people who are also up there. Yeah,
sure. And so, well, actually, I want to pick apart that a little bit, because again, my outside perspective as someone that doesn't play anime is that I consider Ryan and Marvin the best in the anime community, best players.
mm-hmm.
And is that an accurate assessment from somebody from one of those people in your perspective?
I think there are kind of like, I don't want to call them hidden gem players, but if you were looking from like your perspective as an outsider, you might
Mhm.
see like me or Ryan won the tournament, but you might not have paid attention to the top three. Those might always be the same people. And those people could have also won the tournament. They just didn't. It's that type of thing where there are other high level people who maybe they don't come out as much, or maybe they only play at the beginning of a game's life cycle, or maybe they are just like doomed to like third place type of situation. Like
What would be a scenario that would doom somebody to third place?
let's say that this actually kind of goes back to Dragon Ball. Actually, there, in my opinion, there was a period of time where we had almost like a rock, paper, scissors scenario where one player could beat one player, but then they couldn't beat the other player. Like in that triangle, one player could beat one of us, and then like let's say I couldn't beat the other one, or I had a lower chance to beat that one. So it really depended on how the bracket decided destiny, that we would have that scenario where one person is just always getting third place because maybe they can't beat me or maybe they can't beat Ryan.
That's separate in the conversation of who is the best overall. Then
It kind of is, yeah.
There's an example of that back in the beginning of Street Fighter Five. Not an art scene, but like I remember tuning into Wednesday night fights, and it was always Stupendous and Commander Jesse. That was always grand finals for like months in a row. The difference being the one player played Dulcim, the other played Geef. You know, so like
yeah,
Commander
so it's
Jesse
a matchup thing. Yeah.
won a ton of them. But how many? But was Stupendous the better player, or was Commander Jesse second? But the second best player had the worst possible matchup to fight in grand finals. You know, like so that I thought was a good example of like you can't necessarily always, you know, because if you're the best Geef player, but the second best player is a Guile player, you know, you're gonna get a lot of second places, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the tough part here, is because we were talking earlier about like, okay, so locally, you know, they know how you play, so maybe out of state's a better metric. But then when we talk about out of state, it's usually in the context of a tournament, and now we're beholden to how the bracket shakes out.
Yeah, it's really hard like to get real results.
I think the main way you can tell who the best is consistency. That's really the only metric I could think of that goes over multiple tournaments. You know, like even if you can beat somebody, but you lose to them in grand finals multiple times, and John and I have actually been this way in six. You know, Velociraptor. You know, I won 4 in a row, 3 of which were grand finals with him, and now he's won multiple. Probably, I think he's on his 4th in a row, where I was grand finals for 3 of them or 2 of them or whatever. You know, so it goes back and forth, and it's just like, but the consistency is the key. I don't think many people would argue that, but you can only measure people who show up. You know, like, because then the one tournament that Rika showed up to, she won, and John and I did not win. We weren't even grand finals. So neither one of us was in grand finals. So it's like you can only judge with the data that you have. And it, you know, for all we know, Akita is the best player in Arizona by far, but he's never come out to a tournament.
Sure.
Yeah. But he also has a 2nd place in a World Warrior event.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe Jury destroys Dawson, and maybe I'd beat him every time. Does that make him better than me, or me better than? Like, it's so hard to tell.
Right.
But I think you can only measure the scene based off of who shows up to the scene and consistency from that.
Yeah. it's hard to look at every little thing, like not just the character matchups, but player matchups. Like this makes me think back to the first Guilty Gear Exerd. So was that Exerd Sign was the first one? Our
Yes.
very first Rambat that we had here, the top three consistently were myself, Luke, and HF Blade in Phoenix. So he was the one Phoenix player and the top two Tucson players. Because me and Luke played each other so often, our matchup was like a coin flip. Like
Yeah.
if we met in bracket, it's a coin flip of who's going to win. But Luke had less of a track record against HF Blade. So if he had to play HF Blade, he was more likely to lose, whereas I was more likely to win. I had a higher track record against HF Blade. So over the Rambat course of the season, anytime I would beat Luke, I would win the tournament. But if Luke would beat me, HF Blade would win the tournament or would be more likely to win the tournament. And then in the end, HF Blade won the Rambat on the last, because the points were so close. It actually came down to the final Rambat where Luke beat me in losers finals to go play HF Blade. And then he couldn't beat HF Blade, but it was based on who won that tournament would have won the Rambat season because the points were so close.
So that wasn't even like a true rock paper scissors scenario. That just happened to be that would you call it player to player? Or would you call it character to character for that particular instance?
In that particular instance, I think it was player to player because the game was still newer, I would say. And I don't think the matchup spread was as like drastic as like a Geef and a Dalsum. Like we didn't have that type of matchup between our characters. We were just all playing top tier characters. So
what was it? Was it Eddie, Milia, and Faust? I think for those that game.
So it was those were like high tier characters, but our characters were just all high tier. Like we had Elfelt, Soul, and Faust.
Oh, Alpha.
So we were all pretty good characters.
Okay.
But it's just an interesting way to look at things. Like some players might not have as good of a metric against another player. So it's hard to gauge who is the best among those three or whatever the group number is.
I think because we were talking earlier about excuses, right? Or I brought that up. And, when we against lower level players, I think that oftentimes excuses are a defense mechanism for ego. And that can come from the feeling of if I lose to this person, they are better than me. And that's the part where I think the picture that we seem to be painting on this show, at least, is that losing doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means it could be the matchup. It could be the player to player matchup. It could be the character to character matchup. It could be the way the bracket rolled out. But in other times, maybe it does mean that you're better. Like at the same time, though, like you still have to have some kind of feeling of somebody won and somebody lost.
Yeah,
There's still that sense of superiority, right?
I think one way to look at it is kind of the way we talk about tournaments is the person who won was the person who was the best that day. I think that's just how it is. You lost to this person, they're better than you today. Unless you have a way to flip the situation where we've seen those type of things before where a match happens, a loss happens, and the loser immediately comes up and is like, I want to money match you right now. Or as soon as it's available, we're money matching. Yeah, because that's like trying to reclaim that I'm better than you situation.
Yeah,
I get you.
And it's fun to tell those people to go to hell and hold that L.
Right? That's fair, yeah.
It's funny because I actually have a story like that where I was at a SoCal tournament for Guilty Gear Exerd, the second one, which I don't remember what it was called. Whatever. One of the Exerd games. And I beat somebody in tournament, and I play Faust, who has a randomly generated move, like a move that is actually random. And I beat someone due to an interaction from a random item that they didn't notice on the screen.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the most salt-inducing thing.
And it was in losers bracket, so that's it. You're out now. And even I'm like, it doesn't feel good, like for me even to be like, you lost based on something like that. And that person was upset, and they said, "Okay, I want to money match you right now." And I was like, "Okay, cool, we'll do it right now." And for me, it was because we're not in tournament anymore. I felt better. Like I'm playing outside a tournament now, so I'm in more of my comfort zone. And I won the money match more convincingly than I won our tournament match.
Ooh.
And at that point, you just have to say, well, you have to hold it now. But it made me think of that because it was like that exact scenario where someone wants the money match, and I went for it, and I still ended up winning.
So there's another dimension to this as well, of like not just the tournament, but also the format of the tournament. Where like we've seen round robin tournaments, we've seen first to three tournaments, and who is better in a long set? Like if you play a grappler, right? Like 2 out of 3 is probably. Actually, I don't know. Is 2 out of 3 a nightmare for a grappler or a blessing? It's 3 out of 5 or a long set even better, where you can make harder reads. Um, and like does set length have a place in this discussion, or like does the format of the tournament, like being round robin, where you can study all the matchups in advance or whatnot, does that have like standing on who is the best, or more
Yeah.
legitimacy in your guys' mind?
I think across the board, the more data points you have, the better, the more accurate you can predict an outcome, right? Like if the goal is to see who's the best, the more data you have, the more solid your opinion can be. So yeah, for sure, I think better players generally win longer sets. I think that's why people hold Topanga in high regard, because the first 7 is like that you win that, you've had multiple. There wasn't any one thing that beat you for 7 games, and if it did, I mean, you just got to get better. But like a random interaction can kill you. Like let's say you're playing somebody who is a similar skill level to you, right? Maybe you're slightly better, but they're close enough to where it's always a close match. But if something happens, one interaction that is a little random can literally take a game from you, and then they can outplay you the next game. Maybe they would have outplayed you anyway, but in a 2 out of 3, it could be over already.
Yeah.
Before you even, like, let's say you lose to a random thing game 1, and then they outplay you game 2, you're done. But in a first to 7, you have a lot more wiggle room, a lot more opportunity to test things.
You play differently, right? Like you can play based on reads versus that, like kind of that stable game plan style we were talking about earlier, where you take less risks on purpose because it's a 2 out of 3. And so to that end, though, like isn't the person that gambles the hardest in the 2 out of 3, like, and they win off of that, like would that constitute being better because they're able to take advantage of the format better? Like, are they technically better in that regard?
They might be better at that format, but do they have more skills? Like it's like obviously there's multiple skills required in fighting games, right? There's like neutral, there's like offense, defense, reactions, and you may have more of those skills than they do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win at 2 out of 3. But I think the odds are more in your favor in a longer set if you have more of those skills than they do.
Sure. But also the skill of being able to execute a stable game plan quickly in a short amount of time, is that not also a sign of
that is one of the skills, I think.
That's one of the skills, I would say. I mean, like composure is also a big important skill for tournament, because you have these, especially if we're going to talk about the high risk player or the gambling player, you have to have the composure to play against that, because maybe a risk makes you lose a round, or a risk of the opponent that they took that you can't believe they did that, and they won the round, or they won that first game. You have to now have the skill of composure to play better and adapt to that playstyle.
Yeah, there's so many skills required, different ones that you could break into different categories. I don't even think we would get them all if we tried to use them here.
Yeah.
It's
Clutch.
almost infinite.
That, like, one of the best players in the world, Mena RD, is one of the most clutch players I've ever seen in my life. When it's all on the line, nobody plays better than Mena RD. Does that mean is he more solid than Tokido? Then I would say no, personally. Close. He is damn close. But he has more of those skills. He's more clutch. He could play in those tournament formats better than Tokido. He can mix up his options and throw off his opponent better than Tokido. So who cares if Tokido is slightly more solid after 30 years of playing fighting games? Yeah, you'd expect that. But Mena RD has more skills when it comes to winning, which is that you don't get money for being solid and getting 7th place. You get money for being the guy who can win on the given day.
Sure. Okay. Well, composure and being able to gamble and being able to be good that day, all that kind of ties into a question that I've been thinking about too. And part of the reason why I wanted both of you guys on specifically is that when you are considered the best, as nebulous and infinite possibilities as we talked about on this show, but when you consider yourself the best, do you guys ever feel like an extra bit of pressure on yourselves to deliver? And if so, how do you cope with that? Let me actually preface this a little bit more, because Mike, you even brought up in the past, like earlier in this show, when you're the best, people start gunning for you, and then that turns into like a higher pressure situation. So in a sense, you're dealing with more pressure than your opponent is, and you're playing a different game altogether, where you're playing not to lose and your opponent is playing to just beat you. And I was playing against Nick the other night, and he was playing Ken, and I was playing Ken, and I was like the score was a little lopsided, but I was also like, man, I don't have to work nearly as hard as Nick does here, because I don't have pride to protect, because I'm not playing my main character, versus him, who is like, oh my god, this guy's gonna beat me with my own character. And that changes the dynamic a little bit, and it changed some of his choices, I thought. And so, like, the idea of even playing a different game, just, I don't know, it blows my mind when the stakes change as well. So I wanted to also give you guys time to think of your answer. But like, Mike, as a good example, like when you are considering yourself the best and you're defending that title, like what is that feeling like for you? Like, how do you approach that?
I think so. It depends however you feel about a win or a loss is going to depend on what your goal was in the first place. When you're winning multiple tournaments in a row, your goal is, if you got 3 in a row, you want 4 in a row. And if you got 4 in a row, you want 5 in a row, that's your goal. Now, some people, like, their goal, maybe they know they're not going to win a tournament, or they're not confident that they could. But they are like, if I put in enough work, I could beat him. If I focus and I study how to fight his character and how he plays, I could beat him. And I've done that before. I've been that guy. I've had it with specifically Nick as the guy I'm trying to beat. I'm focused on, how do I fight Fei Long? This is Street Fighter 4, obviously. How do I beat him? What does he like to do? And then I did it. I did it once. Did it a couple times, but the first time I did it was super important to me.
For sure.
And then I immediately ate shit the next round. And it felt good to beat him, because that was my goal. So that, I guess my point is whatever your goal is determines how the outcome, or how you feel after the match. So yeah, when you are winning, your goal is to win, which is an extremely difficult goal to achieve. So there's more pressure on you, because your expectation for yourself is higher. But if you're showing up and like, boy, I sure hope I don't go 0-2, you're happy when you win a match. If I went 1-2 in a tournament, I feel horrible, horrible about myself. Like man, I'm really slipping. Like I went 1-2. If there's 4 people in the tournament and I go 1-2, I am feeling terrible. Like, so I think that's the point is whatever your goal is. And I ask new players that sometimes when I feel like they're good, but I don't really know if they're invested. I'm like, what is your goal? Do you want to win tournaments? Or do you just want to be good enough to beat people? Because it's a huge extra step when your goal is to win tournaments.
It's almost like it is the loftier that your goal is, the heavier it weighs on you, I think, while you're playing, compared to I just got to rob Mike for one game and hit him with an overhead a couple times, overhead at level 3, and he'll switch to Kim, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That person that you're talking about, I think his goal that day was to win,
I agree.
or to at least make it to the series. That was his goal, and even though I think he got 4th place, we're all talking about Nick since we're basically beating around the bush.
Yeah,
he was not satisfied, although he had never gotten a 4th place to my knowledge before. But Nick is a competitor. He's won before. He's been a winner. He's won multiple tournaments in other games. He was not satisfied with 4th place. But there are people who are more skilled than him in the game right now because of his knowledge base, who are happy to get 7th place.
Right. It's a player instinct problem in a way, or not necessarily an instinct thing, but I've even fallen victim to that myself over time. Is like there is value in being underestimated because the pressure changes. You don't have the same pressure that the Titan that you're trying to beat and take down. Like if it's a David and Goliath scenario, everybody wants to look like the hero or the underdog because then people will root for them, right? And I found even myself personally being like, man, I just want people to like me while I play these games, which is also an extremely, that's an anti-competitive mindset in a lot of ways. But people genuinely do feel that, I think, while they play. And so the goal shifts accordingly, which is what if I just like sabotage myself essentially and make myself the underdog again? I found myself doing that multiple times throughout my fighting game career. It gets in the way of the true growth, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's not. We shouldn't expect everybody to suddenly have that, or to want that, to be the best, or want that mentality. Sometimes people are literally just playing for fun, right? Or that community side that we were talking about.
And that's okay. That's completely fine. But one thing, anybody who I see, I'm trying to think of how to word this without being mean. I've never met somebody who won a tournament when their goal was to not go 0-2 or to go 2-2 or whatever. It's always
not
the people
by accident, right?
Yeah, like I don't think that there's been a person who's like going to a tournament and winning it when they were like, oh, I didn't think I had a shot at all. Unless it's like your first time in the scene and you have no,
don't know anybody.
Yeah. Like, have you ever won a tournament, Marvin, where you thought, oh man, I hope I don't go 0-2?
I mean, I have situations, especially when the games are newer, when I'm not I don't feel as confident, but that actually does segue into the way that I feel when I enter tournaments. Because it's not that I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to go 0-2, but I'm always thinking did I practice enough? Am I as good as I felt like I am? When I get to the tournament stage and it's time to play, I'm thinking did the other people improve more? Have they improved beyond me already? And I actually worry a lot about my first games. nerves, not necessarily like nerves wise, but like I don't think at the beginning of the tournament I'm going to win this tournament. I think it's mostly like, did I practice enough, or how much better are people now? Like that kind of stuff. Like a lot of uncertainty. I approach with a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of tournaments, and then I think I ease into it more.
Is that like a manner to keep yourself like humble, or does it help like mitigate the feeling of loss if you do get mauled?
I don't think so. I would probably still feel pretty bad if I lost. I think it's mostly not like a second guessing type of thing, but always feeling like I could have done more still. Like I could have practiced more, or I could have been more prepared for X, Y, and Z. And then we get into the game, and so like, oh, actually everything's working pretty well. Like my plan works pretty well. Everything's going pretty fine. I think that's how I usually approach a lot of tournaments.
Yeah, but you prepare like your intention is to win.
Yeah, the intention is to get as far as I can go. Yeah, which if we're talking on a local level, I guess my goal is to try to get like top 3. In a lot of these scenarios, I'm thinking like, oh, I should be able to at least get like top 3.
Yeah, I think you set a goal for yourself when you start the tournament, right? Like if you're a new player, it's not to go 0-2. If you know you're a mid-tier player, it's like, all right, I want to win more games than I lose. Or maybe it's, I just only want to lose to players who I know are better than me. I don't want to lose to anyone where it's questionable, like,
yeah.
Like if you lose to first and second place, you don't feel as bad, But it all comes down to that goal, essentially. And when you meet that goal, like it happened to me 2 tournaments ago, where I was playing really well. I was prepared to win, but then I won winners finals against Jon, and then as soon as he won losers finals, I was in the X series. And so my goal, the overall goal, or a goal I had, was met, and I felt like a weight lifted off. And I feel like that also got rid of some of the hunger that I had.
Do you think that would make you play worse, though, in that scenario?
I don't know. All I can say is that it felt different. And then I think I was okay taking more risks because of that. And maybe that contributed to my loss more so than it. I feel like the pressure pushed me more in the winners final set than it did when the weight was lifted off when I knew I was already in the X series.
I asked that question too because I've personally felt multiple times that reaching my goal in a tournament has affected me in a negative way.
Yeah.
I was notorious, like for years, getting 7th place, like when I travel like outside. And I would reach top 8. And my goal was to get top 8. And then I'd be like, okay, I'm done now. And I feel like I don't play as well, especially when a lot of top 8s at majors and regional tournaments, it doesn't happen the same day as your bracket, as your pools. So the pools, that's the stressful thing. And you play through that and you get to top 8. And that weight and that time was making me feel like I don't need to do anything more. And I would always feel like I played terrible in those top 8 games.
Yeah, there is something to that, meeting your goal, and it's not even something you can necessarily control, because you can scream at yourself in the mirror till you're blue in the face that I'm going to win this tournament, Yeah. But maybe on the inside, you're not going to, but you do think a reasonable spot for me to end up is X. And if you hit that goal, yeah, I do think you lose a little bit of steam. I wouldn't say you necessarily are satisfied even, but you know you're not going to feel as bad.
You're kind of bracing yourself for the loss.
Yeah,
I can take that on a macro level as well with my journey with Street Fighter 6 is that, like, you know, when the game launched, like I got to meet a lot of new people and like a lot of new players that I've never interacted with in the competitive fighting game scene locally even. And I did the same kind of deal that you mentioned earlier, Mike, about like what are your goals? And I realized that I actually didn't have a goal at that time either. And then so like what would I do? I talked to one person and they were like, you know, top 8 at a major. And I was like, okay, I've never seen this guy play before. That seems extremely unlikely. And then I played them, and that goal is extremely unlikely and untenable because they just clearly didn't have the perspective, right? But I was thinking about that too, and I took that goal on for myself, and I was like, yeah, maybe I think I can make top 8 at a major. And when I went to defend the North, I kind of did what Marvin did, which was like I flew all the way out here to Brooklyn. It would be really disappointing if I didn't meet my goals. So I'm just gonna try to be I'm gonna try to focus on just getting as far as I can. But man, it would be really cool to meet that goal because I really want this. And then I ended up getting into top 8 on the winner's side, which guarantees you 5th, no matter what. And so that, you know, we talked earlier about like what does it truly mean to be the best. Frankly, I felt there were better players than I were at the tournament. There were more than 8 better players than me at the tournament, but the bracket played out the way that it did. And once I got to the top 8, I experienced kind of like what Marvin mentioned, and I also had this like extra layer of like getting to play on stream and getting to play on Mena RD first game in top 8. And at that point, like I remember in the match, like right before the match, I'm like, I think I can beat this guy. And then like a round or 2 in, I was like, I don't think I can beat this. And the YouTube video will show that I could not beat that guy. It was 3-0. It was bad. And like I rallied a little bit in the losers bracket, but I still went 0-2 in top 8. And I do attribute it to the fact that I just ultimately I didn't go there to win the tournament. I went there to make top 8. And I did, and then I didn't have the sales, the win in my sales anymore. And then I took that went a step further on a macro level here, where Evo came around, and Evo, like, there was no way I was making top 8 at Evo, realistically, and there's no way any of us were making top 8 at Evo. But I wanted to get as far as I could, and I did. I got as far. I got pretty far. And I was very happy with the way that turned out. And then after that, I met my goal, and I didn't have another one. I don't have another one to this day. I got sick right after Evo, and so that like I was just in bed the whole time when the Game On Expo was happening. And so I didn't even get a chance to flex there. And I was just over time, I just found myself losing more and more. And I was like, I don't really have a passion to compete right now. And I found that it is due to that lack of goal. And I was even now, like in March here, like I don't even really know what the goal is. I don't even know what the goal for a lot of us locally are. And I give a shout out to Maynard in particular for putting the X Championship series together, and for any of the tournament organizers like Daniel and Sean and company, that by creating these tournaments, you do create goals for individual people. And that X Championship series is a huge motivator for someone like Nick, who he is admittedly not playing the game as much as everybody else, but man, did he want that. And he got pretty far on that want. So I just like, that's a little bit of like live journal stuff here, where I'm just kind of recounting my competitive like journey with this game, where I'm like, I wondered why. Obviously I got married, and then we had a family stuff in the Christmas season, and now we're starting to search for a house, and I continually run into family stuff on tournament days. But all of that is, I think, a surface level excuse, because fundamentally I'm not sure what my goal is. And I actually kind of hoped that having this conversation with you guys today would light that fire again.
And the thing, I know you've had a lot of legitimate stuff come up and things going on, but it's like, you know on the inside whether or not you would have found a workaround if you had a goal. Maybe you would have found a way to reschedule something so you could make it to a tournament. Maybe not. Only you know. And same with me as well. So you know whether or not having a goal is the reason why things have played out the way they are. For me, coming into Street Fighter 6, I ended Street Fighter 5 very dominantly. I don't think a lot of people would argue I was the best person showing up at the time. My goal was to continue that level of consistency. And to an extent, I did. I won 4 tournaments in a row. And I feel like when I did that, I lost my goal. I didn't replace one, like how yours was to get top 8. You didn't replace it.
Yep.
All of a sudden, you're not practicing to the same level you were. And I've done the exact same thing. So I feel you 100%. Once I felt like I hit my goal where I could, even whether it was true or not, I could tell myself at night when I'm laying in bed, I'm the best. That's obviously always going to be somebody's opinion or not. But in my opinion, I was for a brief moment in time in this scene. And then when I hit that goal, it went away. I started playing Helldivers, Pal World, any other thing I could do to give myself an excuse to not have the pressure to keep that performance up. And maybe I wouldn't have been able to keep that performance up anyway, because the scene is great. People are good. People are always getting better. And when people are gunning for you, it's rough. But I took the easy way out in finding other games to play and making ways for my upcoming losses, whether they were going to be there or not, to sting less. And I need to stop doing that. You need to stop doing that.
It's a self-sabotage thing, right? Well, the light bulb that went on in my head, not out, is fucking Daigo's book, The Will to Keep Winning. I never understood what that title was. Now I do. It's not just about winning the tournament. It's not just about beating that Titan and like playing the underdog and being like, oh, everyone loves me now. It is do you actually want to keep winning consistently? Can you keep redefining that goal? And I think that, I don't know, like maybe Capcom Cup is out of reach for the 3 of us on this call right now, but like there is another goal out there, I think. And I'm having difficulty finding it right now, but I bet we can come up with one. The X Championship Series, I bet. Maybe I'll try to make that qualifier.
I think you need goals to be steps, like a stair,
Yeah.
And going from I'm the best in Arizona to I've made Capcom Cup is a huge leap. So maybe it's possible if we could find, and maybe, like you said, maybe X Series is that. If we could find the steps in between there, maybe it's play more online tournaments and top 8 in online tournaments.
I feel like online can be used to supplement those goals, especially when they added like the legend rank system. So you have something to go for, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that you're like the best, because they're just numbers. And online is not the best indicator of who's the best, but it could be a goal. At least it keeps you playing. I think a problem for me, and probably for some of us older people in the scene, is that there's not a lot of offline events anymore.
Right.
Especially for us in Arizona, California is so close that we used to go to all the California events. Like our little Arizona group used to go to SoCal regionals, all the other like West Coast Warzone, like little, like smaller things that were just SoCal tournaments that we could just easily hop in a car and drive over there. There's a lot less of those like testing events. Like those testing events are, I think, what keep us motivated, or what can keep you motivated. Like imagine, because we all talked about Evo, all 3 of us talked about Evo. Imagine if there was an Evo quarterly. Every quarter you went to an Evo. That would keep you motivated, and that would be your goal, is I want to do better at the next Evo. I want to do better at the one after that. And then after that, I want to try to continue to do better, or continue to be consistent. When you have that ability to test yourself, that's what can keep you motivated. And I think that's what is difficult in the way things are now, is that I don't want to call it oversaturated, because that's a negative way to think about it. But if there's 5 tournaments online every week, more than that, let's say there's even more than that. If there's all these tournaments every week, then you're at risk. If you try to motivate yourself using those tournaments, you're at risk to burn yourself out.
There's so many of them.
Yeah. So it's hard to find those things to motivate you when they're constantly happening, or the one that you prefer, the offline one, isn't happening.
They hold less value.
Yeah, they hold less value. Like like the online tournament is happening so often that, yeah, it's hard to value it as much, or to even take it as seriously. If you were entering, like, we used to have weekly tournaments in Tucson for Street Fighter 4, like Friday night tournaments every Friday. And we weren't even playing for money, just enter. But that stuff was not very motivating, because it happens every week. It's more of like a social aspect at that point.
Those are the ones that Abe used to run out of his apartment.
Yeah, the Abe tournaments, which they were fun. I'll say they were fun, but it didn't get me thinking I need to practice for Abe's tournament, because there's next week. and the week after that. I don't need to really try for this one in particular, because there will be another one very soon.
Even putting my TO hat on for a second, like the Ranbats, I've actually been a proponent of abolishing the Ranbats, so to speak, because I know that the magic number is 3. You have 2 Ranbats that are always really successful, and then everybody stops showing up on the 3rd Ranbat. And it's not necessarily any one individual's fault. It's just that, like, the bi-weekly even was too often for a lot of people, and for the lower level competitors, they're like, oh, I don't have a shot at this anymore because we're 2 tournaments in and I can't even make top 8. And for the top level players, they're like, it's still kind of competitive, but, like, maybe it's the situation that Marvin mentioned earlier, where one guy's running away with the whole thing, and that guy's clearly the best, so you just get demotivated, I guess. I don't know what the actual, like, real silver bullet here is. There probably isn't one. The championship series that X Button's putting together is probably a step in the right direction, though.
I think the last Ranbat that ever happened for Street Fighter V, the format change to that was the correct one, because we still played for points, right? So showing up did matter, but there wasn't
the format change in this case.
I believe Abe ran it, and he ran it like Capcom Cup. I think Abe ran it. If it wasn't Abe, and I'm giving Abe the credit, then sorry to whoever actually ran it. But Steve, Abe, somebody who was one of the TOs back then was running. And so the way they had it is, like, they had all these everybody got a certain amount of points per placing in top 8. I think it was like 7 for winning, and then it went down from there, And with that, it kept people, because it wasn't just one spot. It wasn't like by the 3rd tournament you knew so-and-so was going to win, because you were only fighting for a spot to show up at the final day.
Got it.
And the more spots you have on that final day to play for, the more people are going to keep showing up.
That seems like a good format, yeah.
It's almost like finding that nice middle ground where you're not necessarily giving out participation trophies, because we know how the old guys love those. But it needs to be within reach to motivate people to come out to play. And that has greater ramifications of, like, is the scene growing? Is there enough people? Are there enough, are there enough competitive players? Is the scene too big and there's too little competitive players? Or, are people not serious about it? I think we've all talked about that today, and as far as, like, that killer instinct, or that desire for greater than, top 3, or having bigger fish to fry. It's just, yeah, this was never going to be like, hey, this is why we compete, and this is it, and you just have that mentality and we're good. It's the fact that everybody has different reasons for playing these games, but there is a common thread amongst the highest competitors I found, and it was a privilege to be able to talk that through with you guys today. So thanks for being on.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Any shout outs on the way out here? Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, shout outs
like
to
last
the AZ. Shout outs to the AZ scene, all the the guys that keep us all motivated. Shout outs to Chase for beating me and motivating me to destroy him at the next turn. Shout outs to Marvin for making this a great conversation, and as well as my wife that she's been cooking.
One of these days, I was gonna hoping you were gonna miss your wife. One of these days, I was gonna clip that and send that to your wife, dude.
No, she's a huge proponent of why I can spend so much time playing, and then even when it's spent on Helldivers and not Street Fighter, she still has a big hand in that. You might have heard her beating her meat in the background as she's cooking, but but yeah, like shout outs to this whole scene. It's very keeps us all here.
Cheers. Marvin, any parting words?
Yeah, I gotta say basically the same thing. Like shout outs to the scene, all the new people who come in, they stick around. Like you were saying, the goal thing is really hard, especially for those newer people to find something that motivates them through their losses, even to keep coming out and playing. So shout outs to all the newer people that are still coming out and making the scene what it is. Shout outs to my wife, who's also here. I think she's sleeping in the background, but yeah, shout outs to her. She also very supportive of me playing, and also when I'm not playing fighting games, this is now a lot of the time too. So kind of in the same situation as Mike there, where I'm like, I want to play all these single player games, but I'm going to lose now.
Also, you need to write a book too. Like you just released a book recently in the past couple of months, right?
Yeah, I released my new book in December, so 3 months ago.
Cool.
But yeah, and then I always have new books coming out, but luckily I get to do that on a separate time frame than my fighting game time. So
cool. Alrighty. Well, this has been. Oh, actually, shout outs to my wife too, so that way I don't look bad compared to these guys.
Shout outs to Jess for fighting for democracy.
Yeah, she's literally playing Helldivers in the other room. If you guys heard any shrieking or anything like that, that's from the democracy. Yep. All right. This has been the Absolute Guard Podcast, episode 76 with Thrasher and Kyoku. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Spiral Series, YouTube at youtube.com/Spiral Series, and an Apple Podcast and Spotify under Absolute Guard. Thanks again, guys. This was a super awesome episode, and it was a privilege to talk to y'all. Oh, I got to play the closing music. I wasn't ready. I was too heartfelt. Hey, so if you're listening this far in, congratulations. There's more Absolute Guard podcast. Shortly after after we ended the show, we did not hang up and we kept talking because we're friends and we do that. So I just hit the record button while we continued our conversation, and you'll hear us refer to that. And to set the stage here, Marvin had been talking about how he had just started learning Tekken 8 as a new player and getting a chance to see how new players, chase that dopamine hit of getting a win, because it's a lot harder to get that win when you're a new player. And so he gets to experience that as somebody learning Tekken for the first time, and it's gotten him thinking a lot about how that works and what motivates people. So enjoy all this extra special feature stuff. It's pretty good time, pretty good talk. Love those guys. See ya.
The extended cut.
Yeah, it's an extended cut.
At what point, how early on in your fighting game career did you guys get your first win? Whether it was like, it doesn't matter what kind of win it was. When did you get your first win?
Like a tournament, or like just a
tournament win?
So for me, I think this might have been my first tournament win was at like a bookman's tournament, like a local bookman's tournament. And it was not long after Guilty Gear Accent Core came out. And it didn't feel like such a like random thing that I didn't care about. Like if you went to a store and they happen to have a tournament and you were playing against just nobodies, because the scene came to these tournaments like on a local level. Like Rock was there, or like Blairin was there. Like a lot of these old school players were playing at these bookman tournaments, and they would do Third Strike, they would do CVS, they would run different games all the time. So when they finally got around to running an Accent Core one, I was like, okay, I can win this tournament. And it was still not easy. Like I think the grand finals was me and Rock.
But you went in thinking that you could win.
I went in thinking that I could win. But
that's the word, right?
See, but but that is a part of it, like because I'm curious for John when yours was, because I know when mine was.
So I've won a Street Fighter 4 tournament before. I just cannot remember which one it was, but the one, I think the question you're asking is like which one like really motivated you or gave you that big dopamine rush. And
no, the first one,
the very first one.
I'm curious how early you got your first one. Like Marvin, how long had you been competitively playing fighting games when you won that first tournament?
So I was playing competitively when Guilty Gear Reload was out. So it had been multiple years later that Accent Core came out.
Like 2?
Probably like 2 years, yeah. And I played in a bunch of tournaments and did not do that well.
And then John,
I won a Street Fighter 4 tournament when nobody was there, but like I would say my first like real win was in a Marvel tournament, a Marvel 3 tournament, where I actually beat everybody there, and that was a big deal. Yeah.
How long?
I mean, so I had started playing in 2009, and then Marvel came out in 2011, 2012. And then even then I needed a couple of years to get good there. So I would say 2014, 2015. So like 6 years into my career, yeah.
When was that first win though? Like I know that one meant more to you, but when was that first one?
The Street Fighter 4 tournament where nobody showed up? I think it was probably like a year or two into Super, since I picked up Buki. So I would say like 2012, I would say. So 3
like
years
3
in.
years.
Yeah.
Mine was a con tournament at 2 years where I showed up, and like the guy who was in grand finals was difficult to beat, so I felt like I worked for it a little bit, but like I'm wondering how much of you get that taste of like a dopamine hit from winning, and then you chase that going forward. So like there are people who've been in the scene for 8 years, 7 years, and haven't won anything, and it's like, are they not? Have they never transitioned that goal higher because they never got the taste of it?
I mean, there's a carrot on the stick thing for me for sure with the GameStop tournament for Street Fighter 4. Like I got second there to somebody who was actually part of the Arizona scene, and that's what made me like try to get into the community. That's like I was chasing that second place feeling of being like, at the time I couldn't handle. Frankly, I just don't think I was emotionally ready to be somebody that could win the entire tournament. But I knew that I wanted to prove that I could at least get second at other tournaments. And then I joined the AZFGC for Street Fighter 4. I was very sorely reminded that I was not second place material. But there was still this carrot on a stick feeling of being like, I want that. And for a variety of reasons, like I want to be admired. I want to do cool shit. I want to do executionally hard stuff so that way people think I'm awesome, all kinds of stuff like that. But yeah, I remember it being like, I didn't get, I remember winning a tournament in Street Fighter 4 and then being like, but nobody was here.
Yeah. See, for me, it was that con tournament kind of gave me like a tiny shot of it. I'm like, it's not like a huge win, obviously it's a con tournament, but like it was my first anything, where I didn't exit the tournament, like a loser. Then I think it was like 2 years later, Scrub Cup. Also, not a huge event, but
a lot of people were there.
A lot of people were there, but the best players weren't there, and it didn't matter. I still felt that dopamine hit, and then from there, that made me want that again, and that has driven ever since. So, I think we need to do more things like that. We need to give new players the ability to get that taste of winning without it always being the same 3 people at the top, because it's a little bit easier to adjust your goal once you've tasted it versus, well, my goal this time is to go 3-2 instead of 2-2. You know?
Yeah, but like the tough part about that, because you remember when Abe ran like True Grit and it was True Grit, like the sheer amount of shit he caught for picking, because it was an invitational, he just picked whoever he thought was the best, which is on brand for the theme of this episode, right? And that made the Scrub Cup easy to like disqualify anybody who was in True Grit, right? Or sorry, the qualifier that he did, as well as the Scrub Cup. But like getting the scene to decide on that metric to eliminate the top players from entering is always such a difficult thing to do. And maybe that's what this X Championship series actually represents, is a way for, in addition to that qualifier that he's got, maybe running another event sometime in the future. Not the same day. It doesn't even have to be run by Maynard. It doesn't even have to be sanctioned by it, but we could just key off that and be like, anybody that qualified cannot play in it. And then that's the next entry to get people hooked, so to speak. Hooked on that dopamine.
I do think that it's easier. You have an easier time with the Scrub Cup thing because you're literally telling people you can't show up because you are too good. It's easier to be told you can't participate because you're too good than it is to say you can't participate because you're not good enough.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge barrier for a lot of people, is like they worry they're not good enough to actually play with the big boys or whatever, right?
And I'm saying this as somebody who's never run a goddamn thing, so it's very easy for me to sit here and go, we need to do more of that,
So I actually am brought back to what I thought was some pretty good ideas back in the day. The boot camp style things, which we actually did something similar in Street Fighter 6 at the beginning of Street Fighter 6. But those boot camp things that we did in the beginning of Street Fighter 4, where you have people tiered into groups where they play against each other for like an hour and you tally your wins, and the person with the highest will play the person with the lowest in the above tier, and you could progress up the ladder that way. That I think that was a huge motivator for people back in the day, because
for me.
Those were very heated sessions when we used to play like that. It was like we were playing tournament. And even on those lower levels, it was equally motivating for them because they're playing people who are at their level. So they're in a rotation with maybe 5 other people who are at their same level, and they're all trying to essentially win their
station, right?
Yeah. And I think there is some dopamine to be had there. And I think I'm not saying that like segregation is the best thing, but sometimes it might be in this case. I'm
going to take that out of
context. No, but okay. So yeah, in this instance, in this day and age with the things we have, I think you could make, like, I know Jon is stepped away from being the TO role, right? But I think if you're now arguably more of a content creator. And I think you can get content out of this. Because think about it this way. Back when the first Scrub Cup happened, everything was challenge, sign up the day of the bracket, blah, blah, blah. You can open a Smash GG, tell people to register. Anybody and everybody. And then be like, you can register if you want. Or you can not register if you think you're good enough. But if you want to know, register. And then you do a stream where you read off all the people who are excommunicated from the tournament. And then that is going to inevitably breed some guy who's going to be sitting there cheeky as hell thinking I'm too good for this tournament, and then his name doesn't get called. That is kind of what happened with me. Is I was sitting there like, oh, I thought I was at a certain level in the scene. Then I read the names that were excluded, and I wasn't on it. And I was offended for not being excluded. You know?
Yeah.
And that can be very motivating. That motivated me. I told Ernest, can you believe this bullshit? I'm not excluded. And he's like, then go win it. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to go win it.
And it became a very, formative thing. I don't tell anybody this, and now it's going to be on the podcast or extras or whatever the hell this ends up.
You're about to tell everybody this.
I know. I am about to tell everybody this. When at launch, I actually kept track. I kept a list of all the best players, and I had a tier list going. And I to this day, like I remember I dated it and everything too. So like I would know like how it evolved over time, who like outright just stopped playing the game, and who was top tier, and who like it was almost like a paranoid thing, because I did consider myself the best in the scene at that time. And I was like, okay, so these are the people to watch out for. These are the matchups I should practice, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously colored completely by my own bias, probably by like who beats Chun, who doesn't. At the time it was launched, so who the fuck knew? And I like Marvin, I don't think you were even on the list at first, because we hadn't played until
we hadn't played yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, I didn't know. But I think our scene lacks an arbiter to decide that, because like again, I had my own biases. By like Mike, what you're saying is like we would have everybody sign up. Like we would just like run on the honor system and be like, hey, sign up if you don't sign up if you think you're too good or whatever.
There's very clear. Like I think everyone on this call would clearly not be expected to be in it, right? So like we could sign up as a goof and you could make a joke about it or whatever, but like deep down, I know even if I don't sign up that I wasn't going to be able to play in it anyway.
Yeah,
whatever. But there's a spectrum, and there becomes this gray area where there is going to be people who think that I shouldn't sign up, but I'll do it anyway.
Yeah.
And then you get told, but I mean, this is just an idea. It could backfire, and people could have such big egos that they don't even sign up because they think that they'll not be excluded. Or you could do both. You could name known people and then have everybody else sign up, and then pick and choose people who get blessed with being too good to play in the Scrub Cup.
Yeah, it's like the reverse Abe.
Yeah, that was one thing you were talking about an arbiter. That's immediately who came to my mind was Abe. It's like you need one guy who's fine with everybody being mad at him, who can stand in the middle of the scene and hold his middle finger up like, this is my decision. You don't like it, go pound sand. And that was Abe.
Yeah.
I think as another idea too, I've seen like the 0-2 tournament like format, like all the people who went 0-2 get put into a new bracket at the same event, and then they play in a new bracket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then I've seen beginner tournaments I've seen beginner tournaments where if you get like a certain place in that tournament, like top 3, you're now excluded from future beginner tournaments. So there's stuff like that, but I mean, we only have so many players too. Yeah. So we couldn't be constantly cutting down the number of who could enter a tournament.
That's what I thought too in 4. I was like, man, we got like 30 people, and then 60 people showed up to the Scrub Cup. When
remember, there was even there were a couple people that were mad that they were prohibited from entering because they wanted that easy win, and they like there were folks that like had never, like Benny's criteria was anybody that's made top 8 in a Ranbat, and one guy who has never won any tournament for Street Fighter 4, he got 7th in one Ranbat and he was disqualified from entering, and he was pissed, and he was like, "What I wanted to enter, I wanted to play." And he showed up to TGZ and everything, and was just really upset that he couldn't get to play.
He didn't check beforehand that he was disqualified.
No, this guy didn't really know how to use the internet. He's not going to hear this either. But Interesting.
There's other things too, like there's all sorts of different ways we could try to have tournaments that are not focused on just like the top players here, but um like formats of like where we coach, like maybe the top players are coaches and they have a trainee, and then we have like an exhibition of the trainees against each other,
Yeah.
things like that, like a mentor or coach
We did.
format.
I know that like the team battles were actually like the team battle mode in Street Fighter 6. Like I'm not a fan of it. Mike, I know you're not a fan of it either, but like the lower level players loved the shit out of that. I'm not sure if you guys did one recently at the most recent down the wire, but like I know that a lot of the lower level players like found that to be uh extremely motivating because they get their chance in the spotlight without having to swing with the big boys. I guess it's just. And then the mentor thing. Didn't you guys try that when Street Fighter Five dropped as well? Like, and then that turned into like, well, who's qualified to be the teacher and who's qualified to be the mentee, right?
Okay, so I actually have some data on this from farther back because we
Okay.
did a very similar coaching type of thing, because during that Street Fighter 4 era of the boot camps where our numbers started dwindling, we were wondering like, why are the numbers dwindling?
Mhm.
And it's kind of that thing where the newer people, they start to fall off. Eventually they fall off. So we had this idea that people who were in station one, like the top station, we would do a day or a week where we would have the lower people play. And instead of the top people playing on station one, we would watch the other stations and offer coaching and advice. We would write stuff down, taking notes on people's play of like things they could do to improve, answer questions. We would be there instead of focusing on just playing our station one. We would try to bring everybody else up.
Yeah.
I was gonna say that's actually the main drawback of the boot camp is that anyone who's stuck on station one or like up there, like it gets boring after a while being up there, and so that's a good way to combat that as well, where you can be like, all right, top players, you go and coach everybody else and give them something else to do that rather than just play the same four people over and over again.
And
Um,
I think some people really enjoyed that. Some of those people on the lower level that were really interested in learning were really happy about that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, different ideas.
I think it would be a good idea to do something like that once in a while, and we could even alternate locations because not every new person is gonna like. Let's say we go all right because I would travel for that. Like I would go to Phoenix
just to
for no
mentor people.
for no tournament. I would go up there because obviously I'm gonna get to hang out with the boys
Yep.
after. But I'll go up and there will be casual. Like I will play the game, but to have like a set time where it's like whether it's an hour or two where you're up there watching people play. I've watched like people's replays before. Uh, Only one person hit me up for that, and that was Tree. Shout outs to him. You know, wherever this ends up, because we can't shut up about the game. So, but yeah, like he hit me up, and I sent him a giant paragraph of like, and I tried to give him good points. You did this well, this well, this well. You need to work on this, this, and this. I'm seeing this overall seems to be your game plan, where I think it should be this, and focus more on that. That type of thing. I did that. Only he hit me up for it,
Hmm.
and I know
But if you,
Benny offered to watch replays as well.
but
So
that was like in an online setting though. So you're saying that if we like frame it in as far as like it being an offline casual session, people can come in person, and then by then you already know who's serious too because they're willing to go out there and and play in person. But it's almost like a professor office hours thing, like office hours in college. I remember like you'd have a TA that would just be there, and you'd have to go, and if you had questions on homework that the professor gave you or something, you'd go and they would, they wouldn't do the homework for you, but they would be willing to coach you through it.
yeah, and you could even like for instance, if I agree to go and I commit to going, obviously we would need some time in advance to like actually commit to going. But like let's say Marvin, myself, John, and I'm trying to think of another person of like an extremely high level of fighting games.
Sam?
in Tucson. Sammy. Yeah, Sammy would be another good one.
But Sam's a good point, though, is that would he be willing to do that? Would he want to do that? Because he's
No.
so young that he'd be like, I want to play, you know?
I'm not volunteering anybody for anything. But what I'm saying is you get the people to commit to it ahead of time. Then you set a date and you go. And you get the people, whoever volunteers to do it from Phoenix. I would assume you would do it, you know, because you do that anyway. I'm sure Benny would also do that. You know, Maynard as well. Maynard, like, he's still learning, but he still knows a lot. He could definitely help somebody who is anyone can help anyone. I've had people who are not better than me tell me an idea, and I'm like, you know what, that could work. Then I expand on it. So anybody could really do this, but I think if you get top players to do it, people who've won tournaments or consistently are placing in the top 3 of tournaments, and people who pay attention know this, you could be like, these people are going to be at TGZ on X day. Anyone who sees this, anyone who's new, come meet the top players, come learn, come get coaching. But like, you have to be willing to be coached. Because it's hard to like be like, yeah, we're doing casuals, and then sit there and try and tell everybody how to play, you know?
Yeah.
But if that's what the day is set aside for.
I think
also, go ahead.
Sorry, just to say, I was going to say it could also be structured in a way similar to like the boot camp sessions. So where we have our coaches designated to like a certain group of players. Like each coach has a different group, and we watch that group play, and maybe they'll kind of do their rotation. And even if you do a situation where both winners get off, or both the winner and the loser get off, or maybe we're only talking to the losers, but if we could figure out a way to structure how we are communicating and like how we're talking or why we're talking to certain players.
Have you guys ever seen the reality show The Voice? That's what this is. We're talking about The Voice.
Where you sit with our back turned and we hear KO.
Each pop star like assembles a group of people, and then they coach that they coach that team, and then the teams duke it out, right? That's very similar to that. That's pretty funny. You know, like, that's the other thing is I'm thinking about it from the TO perspective, where like that could be fit into one day. We could have a day where start time is at like 2 p.m. or something, and then everybody meets there, and then you have, you know, 4 captains, and those 4 captains each pick 5 people, and then it just turns into, or however many people show up that day, and then we turn that into a round robin tournament.
Yeah.
So there's still something on the line. People still get stuff. Top players still get to do something. Maybe that's the distilled version of everything we talked about today.
Yeah, I just think there's ways to do it, and it also shows you kind of who's invested in the scene. You know, like, because, you know, we all know top players that will gladly come out and win
the money,
cash,
but not necessarily. Yeah.
But then they don't necessarily reinvest in the scene. You know, one of our top players, he runs tournaments. You know, like him in conjunction with Maynard, who is a huge help to obviously anything that goes on in the Arizona scene right now. Shout outs to Maynard, but Jon wins tournaments and he runs tournaments. So he is doing something for the scene. But there have been people in the past, names we won't name, that will show up, take all the money, leave right after the tournament, and they don't do anything to help new players.
Yeah. I think about that a lot, even from talking to some of the newer players, is they're like, how do I help the scene? Because we also have this like problem where like people don't feel inclined to contribute because there's already somebody else doing that job. And I found that to be the case with like the TO and the head TO for Street Fighter or whatever, handing off the torch over and over again. The reality is that if that spot is vacant, then it'll be filled. Somebody will step up. But once someone stepped up and filled it, the rest of the scene, like, they don't feel compelled to actually try or help or anything like that, right? Or maybe they'll just show up and that's it. But like Maynard is a good example where like Maynard could have easily ended up being a top player in the scene if he had focused on that. But then there was a gap there on who was actually going to start running those tournaments. The reality is that he was, if I recall correctly, he was entering all those tournaments and then seeing how poorly a lot of them were run because a lot it was run by people outside of the community, and then trying to like, and not to throw shade at any of the TOs for running launch tournaments. So we appreciate you, but like there were genuine, and to this day there are still tournaments out there that don't really adhere to proper standards, whether it's the equipment set or like the format of the tournament or being able to start on time or all that other shit. That's Benny's origin story. Is there's a need or someone else isn't doing the job completely and someone fills it in. But the issue is that after someone fills that void, you know, is there a way we can create more voids? I guess, like, why isn't somebody else doing a podcast in the fighting game community? It might be just because that ours is well, frankly, that's probably because nobody gives a shit. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's times when I feel like I wonder if I'm in the way, and that I should just get out of the way and let the community grow a little bit more on its own without me being in the, like, I already dealt with that with the Tucson, not Tucson, with the Ranbats, where once I gave that up, like you know, Steve and Nick stepped in to do that stuff for Street Fighter and Marvel and company, but like I remember having to learn how to let that go. And so I feel like that's something just as we get older, we're going to have to continue to wrestle with that. I see a little bit of that in some of the you know, Street Fighter 2 era OGs, even some of the Third Strike OGs. I don't know.
It's tough. People get burned out.
Yeah.
Hard to continuously do this. Whether it's playing or certainly TOing is way more stressful than playing. So that's why I've been telling Maynard, I'm like, bro, you're running a tournament like every other week. Driving
he's going to burn out.
I told him, I was like, and he told me he's going to take a pretty significant break probably after the X Series thing, which I'm like, good, you need to.
But the kicker is he taking a break as a TO, or is he taking a break as a player as well, or just break from the community entirely? And I worry about that because if he stops playing, we'd lose a pretty strong competitor.
I don't think he'll stop playing, but for sure he needs to take a weekend where he doesn't have to drive somewhere and put on an event.
Maybe that's it. Maybe we take that the voice episode and make it a thank you Maynard part as well. All right. Well, I need to go get some food and I need to edit the episode and stuff. This is a fantastic conversation. I have no idea. Maybe I should put this at the end of the episode. I think I need to put some additional context in because I know I started recording after Marvin started talking about Tekken. But I'll figure something out. Worst cases, we'll put this as like an extra or something for 30 minutes.
The extra bonus.
Yeah. That just means that we need to have you guys back on because we got a lot to talk about, it sounds like.
Dude, like, I've seen there was like a Korn album where there was like 10 minutes of static and then it played another song. Just do that. Just have it unnecessarily go very long. I'd be like, why is there like 10 extra minutes of nothing added to this video? And then all of a sudden we just start talking again.
Yeah, it's like an Easter egg thing. I might do that actually. That would save me the time having to upload it twice and make twice as many goddamn thumbnails. So cool. All right. I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good night.
See ya.
Hey, you too. See you guys.
See you later.
See you, Mike.